Rand Paul didn't walk into this hearing to ask polite questions. He walked in with numbers, receipts, and a demand that the Department of Homeland Security finally explain what they've been doing with billions of taxpayer dollars. When an agency asks for $46.5 billion, the math better add up. But what Paul uncovered wasn't just sloppy budgeting, it looked like a full-blown shell game. Costs that should have been billions lower suddenly ballooned into a figure that left nearly $34 billion unaccounted for. And when DHS tried to explain, their answers only raised more questions. Why are taxpayers footing the bill for billion-dollar sports leagues like the NFL and FIFA? Why are politicians like Tulsi Gabbard allegedly being shadowed by federal air marshals under secret programs?
Realistically, you got under 1,000. But let's just say there's 1,000. You really want a wall on 1,000. CBP says it's 6.5 million per mile. Your response today was 12 million per mile. That means $12 billion for 1,000 miles. We're off here by a factor of 3 or 4 with 46 billion. Where's the rest of the 46 billion? The administration says they want 46 billion for a wall. You could pave all of it and still have, 34 billion left over. What's the 34 billion going for?
Yeah, Senator, thank you for the question. We do have 702 miles of wall today. 598 of that are steel. The rest of that is temporary that's in place. Since the president's been in office, over 70 miles has been erected. We have 11 contracts that have gone out and allocated. We also have 5 more that are pending. Based on the dollars that have been requested, it's not just the infrastructure that would be built that would be the actual wall construction. It would be also surveillance equipment.
The number's way off. 1,000. You could do 1,000 miles for 12 billion. You're asking for 46 billion. So I'm one who's not impressed and would have to see more detail as to where the rest of the money goes. We can't just throw $30 billion out there and say things cost a lot.
I agree. We'll get you the specifics on that.
With regard to the drones and all the preparatory work that DHS does and the government does for the NFL and for FIFA, does the NFL pay DHS for the work you do?
Boy, not to my knowledge. I will.
Well, I mean, here's my point. The NFL makes billions of dollars. We're $2 trillion in the hole. I don't care if government shares their technology and government helps out the World Cup. They ought to pay.
Yeah,
people are paying hundreds of dollars for tickets. I mean, thousands of dollars for the NFL, for Super Bowl and things. They're also paying for FIFA. And so these people ought to pay. And so I'm one holding up these authorizations, and I'll let them go forward. But I want people to pay. I mean, it's ridiculous that the average taxpayer who could never afford to go to an NFL Super Bowl has got to pay for their security. Should the government help? If we have technology they don't, perhaps. But they ought to pay. So NFL, FIFA, I think they all ought to pay. And we'll be insisting on trying to put language in that. If you're a for-profit entity and the government's helping you, you ought to pay for it. With regard to TSA Quiet Skies and Tulsi Gabbard situation, I suspect there are going to be other people that were caught up in this thing as well. I'm horrified by the idea that we took a former congresswoman and we're surveilling her and riding on jets with her. There was another story of an air marshal whose wife, might have been at January 6th or something, and now we're, have air marshals following another air marshal or his wife. So I want to hear the whole story of what happened. I want to hear that people have been let go, that they're no longer doing this. If there were abuses of Tulsi Gabbard's liberties, I want to hear from that. But I want repercussions to come from this. And I think you've said something's coming. Please let us know, and let us know how the program the destruction of civil liberties can be minimized. I frankly probably have trouble with the whole program, but let's see if there's some way. But we need significant reform. If it needs legislation, please come to us with that. Thank you for your testimony today.
Thank you.
This wasn't just about a wall. This was about waste, surveillance, and liberties on the line. And Paul's challenge cut straight through the excuses. He started where it hurts the most, the money. DHS came to Congress asking for a staggering $46.5 billion, with much of it tied to border security and the wall. But Paul wasn't buying the glossy presentation. He broke down the numbers in real time, and they didn't add up. Customs and Border Protection had already estimated wall construction costs at roughly $6.5 million per mile. Even if you stretched that number to $12 million per mile, building 1,000 miles of wall would total about $12 billion. Yet DHS insisted they needed nearly 4 times that amount. That left a gaping hole, $34 billion in unexplained spending. Paul's point was simple: taxpayers deserve receipts, not inflated figures. If a family overspent by that much, they'd face consequences. But when it's the federal government, DHS just waves its hands and says infrastructure or contracts. To Paul, that looked less like budgeting and more like a blank check, and his relentless questioning set the stage for what was to come. After tearing apart the wall budget, Rand Paul shifted to something even more outrageous: billion-dollar sports leagues leaning on taxpayers for their security. He pointed directly at the NFL and FIFA, two organizations that rake in profits from some of the most expensive sporting events on the planet. Super Bowl tickets sell for thousands of dollars, FIFA matches generate billions worldwide, yet DHS admitted they don't charge these leagues a dime for the government's help. Paul wasn't having it. He argued that working-class Americans, many of whom could never afford to attend a Super Bowl, are unfairly footing the bill to secure events for the wealthy and powerful. Why should a family in Kentucky or Texas, struggling to pay rent, cover the security costs of billion-dollar empires? Paul demanded new rules. If private for-profit organizations are benefiting from federal resources, they should be the ones paying the tab, not the American taxpayer. But as explosive as that moment was, it wasn't the end. Because Paul's next revelation didn't just involve money. It involved something far more personal: the surveillance of a former member of Congress. Just when the budget fight seemed explosive enough, Rand Paul revealed something even more disturbing: surveillance. He pointed to reports that former Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard had been monitored under a little-known program called Quiet Skies. According to whistleblowers, federal air marshals were allegedly assigned to shadow her during commercial flights, jotting down details and movements as if she were some kinds of national threat. The revelation hit like a bombshell. Tulsi Gabbard, a military veteran and former lawmaker, wasn't under investigation for a crime. She wasn't flagged for terrorism. Yet the government still used its resources to tail her through airports and on planes. To Paul, this wasn't just bad optics, it was a direct violation of civil liberties. He demanded answers: who authorized this? Why was it allowed? And most importantly, how many other Americans were quietly being tracked under the same secretive program? If this could happen to a sitting member of Congress, Paul warned, it could happen to anyone. But as troubling as Tulsi's case was, Paul suggested she wasn't the only one caught in the dragnet. The next example made the surveillance state look even more reckless. If Tulsi Gabbard's case sounded shocking, what came next was even more surreal. Rand Paul revealed that it wasn't just political figures who got swept into these surveillance programs. Even the people tasked with protecting flights were being spied on. Reports surfaced that federal air marshals were assigned to follow other air marshals, sometimes even their own colleagues' families, under the guise of Quiet Skies. One story detailed how an air marshal's wife, who wasn't accused of anything, somehow ended up under watch. Agents tracked her movements, boarding flights just to monitor where she sat and what she did. To Paul, this was the definition of government overreach. The very officers entrusted with defending passengers from real threats were instead being ordered to shadow each other like suspects. Paul's frustration was clear: this wasn't security, it was paranoia disguised as policy. And with no clear oversight, the abuses could spiral far beyond what anyone imagined. He demanded that heads roll, programs be reformed, and liberties be restored. But DHS's shaky defense of Quiet Skies raised an even bigger question: if they're this careless with surveillance, what else are they hiding in the fine print of their $46 billion request? When pressed for specifics, DHS officials didn't bring answers, they brought excuses. Rand Paul asked the most basic question: where exactly is the $46.5 billion going? Instead of a clear breakdown, he got vague references to contracts, infrastructure, and technology upgrades. They spoke in generalities, never once handing over the receipts Paul demanded. Paul cut through the smokescreen. He reminded the panel that Americans can't just tell their bank costs went up after blowing through a budget. Ordinary families have to balance their checkbooks, so why should DHS get away with billions in fuzzy math? The more the department danced around the details, the worse it looked. To Paul, this wasn't incompetence, it was evasion, and it wasn't just about dollars. The same agency that couldn't explain where billions were going was also asking for more authority to surveil and monitor citizens. Paul made it clear, without transparency, every new dollar was a blank check. But the senator wasn't just calling out bad accounting, he was pointing to something deeper, a culture of waste and unchecked power that stretched far beyond border walls or surveillance programs. For Rand Paul, this hearing wasn't only about one bloated budget request, it was about the dangerous pattern behind it. Time and again, government agencies come to Congress with sky-high numbers, little transparency, and a promise that it's all for security. But as Paul exposed, those dollars don't always add up, and the programs they fund often chip away at freedoms instead of protecting them. The $46 billion request showed the fiscal problem, a culture where waste is written into the budget and accountability is optional. The surveillance of Tulsi Gabbard and even air marshals themselves revealed the civil liberties problem, unchecked authority with no real oversight. Put together, the two issues painted a picture of government that spends recklessly while intruding into the lives of its own citizens. Paul's challenge wasn't framed as partisan, it was universal. Every taxpayer, regardless of party, should be concerned when billions vanish into vague line items and personal freedoms are quietly eroded. To him, fiscal responsibility and liberty go hand in hand, and without vigilance, both can disappear faster than anyone realizes. By the end of the hearing, Rand Paul had exposed more than sloppy budgeting. He had revealed a government playbook of waste, overreach, and excuses. $46 billion requested, yet billions unaccounted for. Billionaire sports leagues shielded by taxpayer money, while working families foot the bill. Surveillance programs tailing not just ordinary citizens, but even a former congresswoman and federal air marshals themselves. Paul's message cut across political lines. This isn't about left or right, it's about power without accountability. If DHS can't explain where your money is going, and if they can spy on elected officials without oversight, what does that mean for the average American? The real danger isn't just fiscal irresponsibility, it's the quiet normalization of government overreach. And that's why this wasn't just another budget hearing, it was a wake-up call. Because if one senator can uncover this much in a single session, imagine what else lies hidden beneath the surface. If you believe taxpayers deserve answers and liberties deserve protection, hit that like button. Subscribe for fearless coverage that follows the facts, no matter who's in charge.